Hello, everybody. This is the Living Ancestor podcast, and this is your host, Ramon Castellanos of Eating Ancient Virtue. And today's episode is a little bit of a mournful one because, as the title implies, it is about the death of magician, author, teacher, and podcaster Gordon White. And I just found out about his death a few weeks ago, and it actually filled me with a lot of sadness, which was surprising because I don't typically feel the death of people whom I don't know in any real degree. It's just kind of not how I'm built. But I realized after hearing about his death that Gordon White has actually impacted my life really deeply. For those of you who don't know, he was a magician and taught primarily about magic, but that would also be too narrow of a way to describe what he did. He had a very eclectic style that combined many different fields of study into these very coherent cosmological maps as well as applicable magical practices. And it is in that context that I first encountered him about a decade ago, where I read his book called Chaos Protocols, and it totally shifted my perspective around magic. I came from a very traditional magical practice, and a lot of my exposure at that time to magic had come from the Lukumi traditions that come from the African traditional religions, as well as the more, I guess, idiosyncratic spirit-based practice that my grandmother had and taught me. So for a long time, I thought that was magic, and then starting to encounter Gordon White's material opened me up to a bigger perspective about what magic could also encompass beyond that, right? Not that those traditions aren't already amazing and beautiful and deep and rich and stand on their own, but it was just an expansion of perspective. And I really loved this book and how he was able to combine all these different threads of perspective into an applicable map, which is one of the things that for me kind of defines Gordon White's teachings. Although, from what I gather reading his eulogies, it is different for everybody. And this is meaningful because he touched a lot of lives in many different ways. One of his articles on sigils and sigil magic, I think, has reached millions of people over the world. And for those of you who don't know, the chaos magic sigil, where you take a statement of intent and you turn it into an image, and then you combine it with other sigils of the same type, all targeted in a particular direction, called a shoal, which is a very popular way to work sigils these days, was actually created by Gordon White. And he was able to bring something really unique into a field of sigil magic that hadn't changed much in over about a century. Gordon White, I see now upon his passing, is actually for me a spiritual ancestor, because in a lot of ways he parented and taught me about magic, and his perspectives also on transhumanism and on the larger global agenda to make humans more like machines has actually deeply impacted my own cosmological framing and a lot of the work that I've done at Eating Ancient Virtue over the last few years. I've actually also included his name and suggested his work in both of my books that I've written over the last couple of years. So all this to say is that Gordon White has had a big impact on me and on a lot of other people. And what I wanted to reflect on today was actually how genius itself can be noticed, can be felt, and how it will be missed when it is gone. So, in my opinion, Gordon White was living in his genius. And now, an important consideration about this is to be able to distinguish between stereotypical classical notions of genius with genius as a force and as a mythological anchor point that can stabilize the direction of a person's life. And to me, that is the truer definition of genius. Yes, there is the genius who can memorize many things and who can work on complex formulas and hold all these different contexts together to create and invent and all of that, yes. But then there's the genius that exists in each person and the potential, at the very least, that exists in each person. And the notion of genius is actually a mythos that is thousands of years old. And as far as I can tell, genius is something that each of us does have access to and can inhabit. But there are a lot of layers within modern culture, and also at a personal level, one could say that we acquire from ancestry and family, and even maybe some of the same karmic patterns that exist inside the soul as it reincarnates and moves between lifetimes, if you believe in reincarnation, that stifle a person's ability to express genius. But fundamentally, genius, as far as I have come to understand it through my work over the years, is something that emerges out of an intersection of various forces. And those are one's character and one's soul. That is something inherent and innate that comes with you into this life. It is a kind of medicine held by the soul, a type of core frequency, a way of orientating upon existence. One way to think about this is actually to reflect on the kinds of powers that different gods hold. For example, Mercury being a god of communication and translation and the mind, and being able to also move between worlds in a very liminal way. For example, Mars being a contrast to that, being about aggression and practice and discipline and masculine force and drive and intensity. Those are different kinds of medicines that each god possesses. Well, each human also comes into this world with a divinely imbued medicine. But there's also more than that. There's the type of experiences and the life path that have emerged for us. What kind of life have you lived, and what kinds of experiences have you had that are inherently unique to you? And then there's the deeper calling, the divine calling, that which we are called to do in this world. And genius emerges from the intersection of this innate preceded nature that we come to the world with. It emerges from the type of experiences we've had, and then also from the divine calling. In some ways, it's almost like a triangulation of a very unique way of working in the world that is fundamentally yours and your own, and that nobody can replicate it. It has to also have this energy of the divine calling, right? The nature of something that is beyond your personality, because genius is fundamentally a creative and generative force that is in some ways chaotic, because it's disruptive and it changes the way that things are done, and it usually disturbs the status quo. Genius has a way of shifting whatever it truly encounters. Not always for the best, let me add that, because there have been many people who could be called mad geniuses that have created some very ugly circumstances in the world through their genius. So genius in and of itself is simply a way of orientating in the world. Like I said, it's an anchor point for the direction that we take. And genius is also something that, in my opinion, and from the explorations I have done in myth and in traditional and indigenous cultures, one of the main purposes of life is to the best of our ability, to inhabit our genius. And Gordon White was absolutely inhabiting his genius. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, he had a way of connecting very different fields because he was a voracious reader and researcher, had an enormous curiosity for the world, would look into all different kinds of elements and draw these interconnecting vectors between them, which was amazing. And he also was able to bring a really unique set of life experiences into his work. He was a world traveler and was able to do something that nobody else is doing. The work that he has done is inherently and fundamentally truly unique and non-replicatable. And this is a part of what I wanted to talk about in terms of genius. Because one of the quotes, and I'm gonna paraphrase the quote a little bit, that really sticks out to me, that was the inspiration for wanting to put together this podcast, comes from Michael Meade. And the quote is something along the lines of that you know someone is living in their genius when their presence can be felt, and when they're gone, that you truly notice it. So, meaning that you're so uniquely in your genius, so uniquely you, that when you're gone, your absence is absolutely felt. And that's going to be the case for sure with Gordon White. What he was doing was so fundamentally different, and so fundamentally himself he was, that there is now, the world is a little bit lesser, let's put it that way, because he is gone. And this is not necessarily the case for all of us, and this is something that's important for us as individual people to be honest about. Because not everyone is living that way, and not everyone is actually unique in that way, right? Everyone has the potential for uniqueness. There is a uniqueness that can be lived out, that is there. It's a seed potential, a capacity, one might say, that is there, but that a lot of us simply aren't living that way because we're trying to live out the status quo, because we're afraid, because we don't have the courage to put ourselves out there, because the type of path that we have chosen to live has really just been something along the lines of a seed that has gone to ground that never sprouted. There are plenty of people who will die, sadly, in a gutter, and no one will miss that they're gone. That's not to devalue their lives, but it is to simply point out fundamentally that they're not living in their genius. And perhaps that's not something that they care about, which is fine. And what I'm talking about is, if you do care about living in your genius, then it does take a particular kind of orientation and the willingness to go into the unexplored dimensions of whatever it is that you're at the edge of, because genius fundamentally moves at the edges and beyond the edges of the campfire, so to speak, of the light of the fire of the known, right? To move into the darkness, to create something that's fundamentally not been created before. And in my opinion, Gordon White was doing that all of the time. And honestly, his death, if anything, deeply inspires me to want to live more in alignment with my genius. One of the things that is also worth mentioning about Gordon White was that he was fundamentally himself. He was so himself, so unapologetically him, that it was one of the things I loved most about him. My wife was just mentioning the other day that she was watching a YouTube video of him speaking, and he pulled out a candle that was actually a giant penis and lit the candle and just set it aside in a way that was completely nonchalant. And this is just incredible, right? Where so many people today are afraid to do anything that might upset anyone, he was just totally himself. And this is also one of the things that his death really prompted me to self-reflect on, which was that, where have I not been truly myself because of fear, because of a lack of courage, because of a status quo, because of what people will think about my work? And honestly, his death really, really moves me to want to be more myself, to honor him in doing that, and to really lean into that aspect of his medicine. in some ways, I've been kind of struggling with my own work here at Eating Ancient Virtue because of the intersection between trying to build a business, so to speak, something that has commerce in it at the very least, and the more innate and authentic aspects of me that want to emerge, and how those things can intersect. And it's been creating struggle for me, and his death, if anything, actually really pushes me back onto my heels and says, hey man, what's really important and valuable here in the world is that medicine, at least to me. And so that's something I'm going to be leaning into a lot more now. But not only this, Gordon White did some really important work for the world of magic, for the world of ancestor veneration, and for how people can relate to these deeper currents of ancestral inheritance that we've gotten that relate to magic and ceremony and ritual and animism. He was a super unique voice in that world. And he had one could say, and I say this totally lovingly, the right combination of character flaws to also make him someone who could reach at scale, right? And so he's done a lot to bring those aspects of our human nature back into the world. And his death means that there is less of that now in the world, right? There's less current of the deeper magical undertow that has been with the human species for millennia now. And so, if anything, his death also inspires me to want to talk more about those things and to lean more into that, because it is a part of my life and my experience, and speaking about it is a part of my genius. So this is to say that his death fundamentally is one that can be felt and will be noticed by a lot of people, and that despite just his life itself, which was already something that moved many people, being impactful, right? His life being impactful, so is his death. Because at least for me, his death is inspiring to want to move deeper into what I do, because I want to honor him, and I also see the void that he has left behind, and that the world needs what he has left behind. Or the void, or the world needs what he was doing, fundamentally. It's interesting. I had a dream for a long time to be interviewed by him on his podcast. It was something that I would have loved, and that would, for whatever reason, would continuously move through my psyche as something that was a real possibility at some point. And sadly, now it won't happen, but that's okay. He had a way of doing things that makes me want to be better at what I do, and that he will be missed. And I want to encourage you to learn more, if some of this spoke to you, about his work. Potentially check out some of his books, and let him inspire you, if possible, to move more towards your own genius and do whatever is required to let that out, because that's one of the big purposes of life. And I hope that he is doing well in the afterlife, so to speak, in his post-mortem existence. I know that in many ways he was very prepared for death. He was somebody who did the work to be able to face death consciously, and to be able to die willingly, in a sense, right? Which is, one could say, one of the big goals of many different magical systems and many different indigenous and traditional cultures, was to be able to arrive at death ready to die complete. And I'm sure he did. In fact, I wanted to share a quote from one of the eulogies I read from a gentleman named Mark Nemglen, that he found in one of Gordon White's pieces of material, which was: the combination of knowing that you survived death along with your ancestors and the heroic dead, is an unmovable backstop that provides you with the courage to move forward in all fields of life. And this is one of the intersections between ancestry and destiny. It's this understanding that we are an immortal soul that has come here with a purpose. And if myth is to be believed, the mythos of the worlds, then a part of that is the ability to live in one's genius, to align with one's ancestry, to have good relation with the land, and to live our lives in such a way that when our time comes, that we can let go willingly because we've done what we came here to do. And I don't exactly know how Gordon White felt about it. I never actually met him in person, but I suspect from what I know about him that he did that. So with that, I give him a lot of love, admiration, and respect for his work in the world, and may peace be with him. Well, anyway, thanks guys for listening to this podcast, and till next time.